Welcome, everyone. All of us, wherever we are, feel welcome for these moments of study, of reflections, as learners as we all are. Within the program is Spiritual Christmas, and the main theme, Jesus' loving invitation. As learners as we all are, having the pleasure with this unique and special opportunity to expand our concepts, our knowledge, our understanding. And today we have the pleasure to have with us to carry on our program, Cintia Coutinho. Those who don't know Cintia Coutinho lives in Crowley, UK, member of the Spiritist Psychological Society in London, where she is responsible for the Children's Education Department, graduated in Economics and Social Science. She will be developing the theme, To Forgive is to Love. And before we start and hand it over to Cintia, I would like to invite all of us to join us in our initial harmonization process with a prayer. For those who wish to close your eyes, please feel free to do so. As we look within, calm our minds, our hearts, in this spiritual environment where we find ourselves. Sustained and supported by the enlightened spirits who anticipated us, our brothers and sisters in humanity. We ask them to bless every and each one of us, involving us with love and peace. And we start this meeting today by expressing our gratitude towards our Creator, our loving Father, towards Jesus, our brother and guide in humanity. Our gratitude towards the spiritual benefactors who are always with us, inviting us to expand our consciousness, to journey within, and to develop our higher faculties as immortal beings as we all are, incarnate in all of those in the spirit who are with us. And as we are all embraced by the tenderness and gentleness of our spiritual guides, united through brotherhood and fraternity amongst each other, we start our reflections today. So be it. Once more, welcome for those who came, who weren't present previously. Bear in mind that we are all carry on with the program, A Spiritual Christmas, with the main theme, Jesus' loving invitation. And today, Cintia Coutinho will be presenting the theme, To Forgive is to Love. And in that way, Cintia, we pass it on to you. We hand it over.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm very grateful to be here today, and thank you for listening to me. Public speech is not one of my strengths, but we learn with Spiritism that we have to overcome our weaknesses. And there will be reflecting about the question, to forgive is to love. And I hope that by the end of the presentation, we'll have an answer. So for us, we'll reflect on a couple of texts by Dr. Alberto Almeida, by Joana de Angelis, The Spirit's Book, and the Gospel According to Spiritism. And if we move on to the next slide, I vote for us to reflect a couple of concepts about forgiveness, and I found a couple of them very interesting and very helpful. And when thinking about forgiveness and its meaning, I think there is two phrases that caught my attention: given scenario or dispositional tendency. So when thinking about forgiveness, are we able to forgive only once in a given scenario with certain people involved, or we have already developed this dispositional tendency? We do forgive, we are willing to forgive no matter what happened, with whom, or in what circumstances. I could find those concepts which were reflecting about those two different scenarios, and I found interesting and good to bring it to us. There is one about Roberts, and he wrote in 1995, and I'll read that to you. Forgiveness, defined as a dispositional tendency to forgive others across different transgressions and transgressors. In other words, forgiveness should predict an increased likelihood to forgive any specific transgression, and as such, has been described as an attribute of a moral individual. All those concepts that you can see, they were found in a scientific journal, and it was a study about what was the relationship of forgiveness and health. I found this one very close to what we study in the Spiritism, because we learn in the Spiritism that we are imperfect beings aiming to progress, to develop, and to live the virtues as much as we can. So I think this definition by Roberts is very close to what we believe in the Spiritism. And if we move on to the next slide, there is also another very interesting concept for us to reflect. And this one is about Dr. Alberto Almeida. And he says, forgiveness is a voyage rather than an arrival in port. It is also an act, but most of all, it is a life habit. It is a process, not just a circumstantial state of being. And I think this go in accordance with what we saw in the scientific journal. This is a definition we use a lot in Spiritism, and I think they both go hand in hand. And if we move on to the next slide, is still reflecting about the concept, because I think there are many definitions around forgiveness. There is two ways for us to look at forgiveness, which I found very interesting. The first one is seeing forgiveness as something unattainable. We won't be able to forgive ever, because forgiveness is something considered for some by only people who are highly evolved with very high moral standards are able to practice it. And on the other hand, we also may see forgiveness as something trivial, as something that we don't really think about. We just pretend we forgive, just we put a social mask on, we mask our feelings and we carry on because we have an interest. We want to keep a certain relationship, but we don't look to what we are feeling. We just put a mask on. We say, okay, I forgive you, but we don't really get in touch with what we are feeling, and we don't process the forgiveness. I think this is also very, very good 2 points for us to reflect about. And I think, pardon me, and to be able to forgive, to truly forgive, I think it's important to bear in mind that we are immortal spirits, all of us. That means we have a physical body, but we are more than that. We are immortal beings, immortal spirits, and we are living in this body for a very short period of time. And we do make mistakes, and it is natural for us to expect that people will also make mistakes. So I think forgiveness is something we have to practice on our daily lives. Sometimes to a lesser extent, sometimes to a greater extent, but it's part of our life. And there is something I found also very interesting in this book called Forgiveness as the Way, and the Way to Forgiveness by Dr. Alberto Almeida, when he says that forgiveness is a virtue that requires continuous efforts to implement, to make it capable of enabling human beings to go beyond themselves, such as that it enlightens them for a revealing transhumanization about their nature as ever-ascending spiritual beings. Like we commented before, we are mortal spirits, we are evolving. And knowing that we will make mistakes, it's good to know that we have this tool, or we have this contingency plan, if I could put it this way. We are able to forgive ourselves and forgive others. And there's also something very interesting I found, which was called in the next slide you will see. the variables in the forgiveness equation. And considering that everything that has been said, we will for a moment think what would be necessary to forgive. We know that we will make mistakes. We know that people will make mistakes and we will need to make amends. But what would be necessary? What do we need to consider? What do we need to reflect about to be able to forgive? And Dr. Albert Almeida again presents us with three variables in what he calls the forgiveness equation, which is the severity of the offense, the willingness to forgive, and the ability to love. The next slide we will talk about is slightly the severity of the offense, which is the first variable. We can associate this variable to the moral and intellectual development of humanity. If we think a few centuries ago, it was considered a normality for us to punish someone with death for crimes perpetrated. Today, it is not okay. We know that. And on the other hand, as we evolve and understand about the God's laws, expanding our conscience, we are able to let it go of hurt. We don't feel worried or we don't feel hurt by the same when the same actions around us happen. We could say that a year ago, for example, if we came across a situation of gossip that had an impact in our life, in our relationships, we would feel hurt and we would hold on to this anger for a long time and wouldn't be able to forgive. On the other hand, today it's fine. We would be able to forgive if that happened again. Also, when considering the severity of the offense, we also go through different situations in life. So we may be able, for example, to forgive a friend who is late for a meeting or someone who stole something from us. But on the other hand, we may not be able to forgive our child's murderer, for example. So the severity of the offense, it talks about different situations and our ability to forgive in different scenarios. There is also another variable for us to think about in the next slide, which is the ability to love. And this one is quite short and easy to explain. It is basically there is a correlation between the amount of love we have developed and our willingness to forgive. The greater the love, the greater our ability to love, the greater our ability to forgive. And on the last variable of the equation, which is the willingness to forgive, I think it's one of the most important because sometimes we may not be willing to forgive and we might unconsciously not perceive that this is happening. I think this is a very good one for us to reflect for a moment. We may not be always open for reconciliation either. And I think to acknowledge that we make a mistake and to forgive ourselves and be able to forgive others when they make a mistake, we need a lot of humbleness. And I think that's why forgiveness can be, we can attain, we can practice forgiveness. It's not something only those who have a very high moral standards are able to practice, but it's not trivial. It is not easily done. I think there is a whole process. We will see more in depth about this process, about self-forgiveness and forgive others in the next slides. But thinking about this slide and the willingness to forgive, we need forgiveness. And also, we could ask ourselves, what would happen if I keep playing the victim and pointing fingers? Certainly, I would feel hurt. I would feel sad and lonely. And if we are willing to forgive, we are willing to set ourselves and others free. And this is a very good point, and a very good point for us to think as well about Alberto Almeida is when he says, forgiveness is not an attitude of appearances stamped with pretty words meant to gain social prize. Forgiveness is a commitment to our conscience in order to achieve inner peace. So I think it's good for us to reflect when situations happen. Am I willing to forgive sincerely? I think when considering those three variables in the equation, the severity of the offense, the ability to love, and the willingness to forgive, is a good start point for us to think about forgiveness. We will move on now up to a very interesting message from Joanna de Angelis in the next slide. And it's from the book Times of Health and Consciousness. It's chapter 11. It's called The Tragedy of Resentment. We could ask ourselves, what would be the consequences of living a life of resentment? Having considered everything that we said, the three variables, we might come to a conclusion. Okay, I am not able to forgive for a certain reason. And let's think what would happen if we decide not let go of hurt when we fail or a certain circumstances require forgiveness. I think this is very clear in this message, which I will read this first slide. Psychosocial, social-emotional, economic, and other pressures trigger various disorders that affect a wide range of society, causing fear, anxiety, and resentment. They destabilize the nervous systems and cause serious neuroses, which are nearly always somatized and are responsible for allergic, gastrointestinal, metabolic infirmities in general, fostering degenerative processes. Under pressure, fragile temperaments look for escape mechanisms and either fall into phobic and depressive states or resort to aggressiveness to affirm and defend their personality. A lot of psychological residue takes root in their emotional and mental field, leading to behavioral disturbances and various diseases that cannot be diagnosed accurately. As we can see, some diseases we have, it may be a consequence of resentment, as well as depression and aggression, be it verbal, physical, mental. We could ask ourselves, are we always armed against people? Are we always ready to fight? Are we always ready to shout? Are we always ready to defend ourselves? I think this could all be related to what we bring in within. Are we forgiving? Are we willing to let go of this hurt? And if we continue with the message in the next slide, it's quite a big message, so we'll see it in the next few slides. Joanna de Angelis, she can enumerate a few consequences of resentment, and four that I found very interesting that she puts on this slide is, first one, for us to perceive if we are living in this state would be when we react to events, to people, instead of thinking clear and acting reasonably. Like I said before, we always ready to fight, we always ready to defend ourselves. We are very anxious. It's like we're ready to go on a fight. The second is to lose the enthusiasm for life. We give up simply. We don't see any reason for carry on doing anything at all. The third is resentment could damage our self-esteem, believe that we are worthless. So if we have thoughts coming in our mind that we don't have any worth, we don't worth anything, it also could be a sign that something is wrong, and we could be dwelling on hurt, all situations that need forgiveness. And the fourth, which is very important as well, is when we play the game of self-destruction, be it through vices, alcohol, drugs, or dangerous activities that could end our life. These are all signs that we may be in need to forgive ourselves and to forgive others. All of it because an underlying condition, we are not able to forgive others. If we move on now and continuing to the next slide, is the same message. How resentment manifests and how do we perceive it? There is it's the same message, but there is some ways we can look out to see if this is happening with us. The first one, and I said it before again, is when we have repetitive thoughts. It could be, for example, I don't deserve what happened to me. I am a very bad person for what I have done. Also, is for us to perceive that this is happening is when we see others as enemies. We should always be armed against everyone because we can't trust anyone. Everyone is ready to attack us. And also another way for us to perceive it is through self-examination. We can reflect about our attitudes, about our choices. We can reflect about what we did, what we could have done better. We can reflect about our relationships if there is anything that we're not feeling comfortable with. And moving on to the last part of the message. Yes, so continuing how to perceive a resentment. Sometimes we may be suffering for a situation that happened, but the people we are suffering about may not even realize they have hurt us. I think this is why sometimes it's important to us to be honest and to be willing and open for a reconciliation, because once we talk, once we clear things out, it might be just a misunderstanding and we might be carrying this burden for a long time. I think it's important to consider that all these slides you can read after. The message is beautiful and very useful. So it will be registered if you have an interest, anyone have an interest, you can read it after. But because of the time, we will move on. I think we touched based on the definitions of forgiveness. We thought about, okay, we know what forgiveness is, but we're not able to forgive. What would be the consequences? So now we will go to the next slide where we can think a little bit about what is the rationale behind self-forgiveness. And we'll be going to see in the next slide 2 questions from the Spirit's book, question 115 and question 132. It is just for us to understand, okay, we learn in the Spiritism that we need to forgive ourselves for the wrongs we commit, but why? What is the rationale? And in question 115, Kardec asked the spirits if some spirits were created good and other evil. And we get the answer that God created all spirits simple and ignorant, meaning lacking all knowledge. God has given them each a particular mission to enlighten them and help them gradually reach perfection through the knowledge of the truth and rise closer to Him. In that perfection, they will find eternal bliss without any troubles. Spirits acquire knowledge by experiencing the trials inflicted by God. If we think, considering that we are thinking about this question and considering that we are incomplete, imperfect beings in the quest for knowledge and for wisdom, which we acquire through several experiences, it is good to remember that not every attempt that we make is successful. For instance, knowing that we parted from a point where we have no knowledge of things and no experience. For us to gain experience, it will be through trial and error. We will have to go through experiences until we gain this knowledge and these experiences, and we will make mistakes along the way. So it does make sense. There isn't bad people and good people. There is just the spirits in evolution, learning, trying to make it right, trying to make it right. Yes. And in question 132, which is equally important for us to build our rationale behind self-forgiveness, Kardec asks the question, what is the purpose of a spirit incarnation? God imposes incarnation as a tool to reach perfection. For some, it is a means of making amends, while for others, it is a mission. So yes, we were given this opportunity to come here on earth for us to learn, for us to try. I think it's important to see this as something that will help us to not to be stuck and paralyzed by fear, because we need to move, we need to acquire experience, we need to learn. And when we make a mistake, we forgive ourselves, and then we move on to the next experience until we get it right. I think this is the normal way of life. We don't mean to hurt anyone or to make anyone suffer, but sometimes we will make mistakes. But I think we'll see along the other slides as well that we will have opportunities to make amends for the mistakes we make. So having considered that, we will move on now to the next slide, which is something we call the 5 steps of self-forgiveness. We'll look into it a bit. They are very interesting, and they help us to understand more about us. And I think it's a good guide by Dr. Alberto Almeida for us to succeed in this attempt to self-forgiveness. So the first one is align ourselves with the inner Christ. The second is acknowledging our wrong. The third is taking responsibility. Fourth, correcting the error. And the fifth, obviously, celebrating the victory of self-forgiveness. So if we move to the next slide, this is one of the I most like. It is explained to us here that aligning ourselves with the inner Christ is when we align ourselves with our essential nature, meaning, as we said before, we are immortal spirits and we have a lot of potential to develop. We have all the virtues, all the knowledge we need to acquire throughout many existences. So when we align ourselves with this whole spectrum of possibilities, we know that we are capable of doing great things. We won't be stuck because we made one mistake. Doesn't matter what mistake that was, we will have other opportunities. So I think this is a good start. Align ourselves with our inner Christ, with our essential nature of immortal spirits. We are able to change to a better person if we make the effort to do so. The second step is acknowledging our wrong. And this is not an easy one, because if we move to the next slide, is the second, acknowledging our wrong. It is not the easiest ones, because there are two things that happen. One of them is called denial. We may not want to acknowledge that we did something wrong, and we may say it wasn't my fault, I haven't done anything wrong, and then we will carry on living life. And there is another possibility that we won't acknowledge our wrong, which is called displacement. When we lay our responsibility on someone else, we could say, I acted this way because of the government, because of the laws, because of my parents, because of my friends, because of my boss. We won't take responsibility and we won't acknowledge our wrong. But we may, there is another possibility as well. We may acknowledge it, that we did something wrong, but with a certain rigidity. And then we'll be stuck in a guilt complex. We did something wrong, and then we see ourselves as not worthy. We were not aligned with our inner Christ, as we said before, the first step, and then we might be stuck. And the only way for us to free ourselves is to acknowledge that we did something wrong. It's okay. It was my fault. We own it. We take responsibility. We admit the truth of our wrong. I find it very interesting when it's put in this way. We admit the truth of our wrong. And if we go to the third one, which is taking responsibility at the next slide, I think it's very similar to this one, but it's basically we assume the consequences of our actions. We owe it. We start with believing in our potential. We acknowledge mistakes, and then we owe them. We accept the consequences. They are real, and then they will happen. And we have, when we follow this path, we have a chance or an opportunity to make something positive of everything that has happened. Moving on to the fourth step, which is correcting the error, which we could call repair. It is equally challenging, but it consists in making amends. And it's when we might be stuck because of our pride. That's why I mentioned before that when we talk about forgiveness, it's very important to have in mind humbleness, humility, because we will need to move, we will need to think, feel, and act. And when it comes to the act, to correcting the error, we will need forgiveness. And it is like a compensatory act when we make up for what we did. And it's the only way is making good. And making something good is the only way, let's say, to erase our bad actions. And finally, and equally important, in the next slide, we will see the fifth step, which is celebrating the victory of self-forgiveness. And the way it was written in the book, and I quote, and because I found it very interesting, is that self-forgiveness can transform vicissitudes into learning, error into experience, negativity into a lesson, pain into a gift, darkness into light. It's certainly worth an attempt on our side, given all the substantial gifts or benefits we will have from trying to do it. And if you still remember when we started, the question was to forgive is to love. So at the next slide, we will start at the next part of the presentation, which is about love. And we said when we talked about the equation on the second variable, the ability to love. Basically, the more you love, the greater is your capability to forgive. And the more we love, the more willing we are to give the extra patience, the extra calmness, the extra understanding we need to be able to forgive. For us to understanding a little bit more about love, at the next slide we will see a picture which talks about the types of love in the Greek culture. This picture has 8 types, but I did some further research and I found out there's actually 9. I won't have time to talk about all of them. We will only talk about 3, which is Eros, Philia, and Agape. And I think they were interesting for us to connect our ideas, because we learn in the Gospel according to Spiritism that in our development we first have instincts, then we have emotions, and finally when we are at the end of our development we have sentiments. So when we think about Eros, it is the selfish aspect of love, when we are concerned mainly with our needs, and we could associate it with instincts. Then we move on to Philia. It's like a natural form of love. When we create friendships and we are able to give something from us. We could relate it to emotions when we are evolving. And finally, we have Agape, which it's called the Selfless Love. It is the unconditional love. When we love, we give, and there is no conditions. It's quite similar for us to what Jesus did when he came to earth, and still do for us. It's a love that is free from expectations, and we could associate it to sentiments. And we've moved on to the next slide. We're going now to see a passage from the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 12, item 3. let's think that, but we thought about love, we thought about forgiveness, but how do we express those type of love? What is the meaning of the teachings of Jesus when he says, love your enemies? Because we know we had many existences, many reincarnations. Let's say that we have a baggage of claims against us. We have mistakes we made, we have unfortunate situations, we have crimes committed. And once we are back in the physical body, we have encounters with those people that we have hurt or that have hurt us. So, in those circumstances, how can we express love? What we could do, as this is, let's say, if this is a teaching from Jesus and he's our master and guide. And I think the answer, we find the answer at this chapter 12 of the Gospel according to Spiritism at the next slide. And I put it in 8 items. And I will quote, to love one's enemies, therefore, does not mean holding for them an affection that's not natural, since contact with an enemy makes the heart beat in a much different way than does contact with a friend. To love one's enemy, it means holding neither hatred, rancor, nor desires for vengeance against them. It means forgiving them unconditionally and without ulterior motives for the evil they have caused us. It means not setting up any obstacles to reconciliation. It means wanting the good for them instead of wishing them evil. It means rejoicing instead of despairing for the good that reaches them. It means extending to them a helping hand in case of necessity. It means abstaining either in word or act from anything that might hurt them or might harm them. Finally, it means repaying their evil with good in everything we do, with no intention of humiliating them. When I read that the first time, I thought this is something achievable. This is something that we can do in our daily lives. We can respect each other, even if we don't have any affinity or any affection. Respect we can practice. We can offer the best part of us. So I think this is a good point, knowing that we have hurt many people and many people have hurt us. I think this is a good point for us to start our self-healing, self-forgiveness, and practicing love and forgiveness towards others. If we move on now to the next slide, there is also a question from the Spirit's book, which sustains what has been said previously. It's question 187, and Kardec asked, Jesus also said, love your enemies. Does this contradict our natural tendency, and isn't unfriendlessness due to lack of sympathy between spirits? And the answer was, it would certainly be impossible for someone to feel tender and passionate love for an enemy, and this is not what Jesus intended. Love your enemies means to forgive them and to do good despite their malicious actions. I think this is very important because it's the first step for us to build healthier relationships, is try to practice love. We also can do it through prayers. We can pray for each other. It's also another way for us to break those cycles of hatred and rancor and resentment, like we saw before on Joanna onto these messages. It's an invitation for us to respect and to be kind, to exercise the type of love considered by the Greeks, as we said before, at the basis for friendship, the philia, until we evolve to a certain level that we are able to practice agape, like we saw the example of Jesus, that he was betrayed, he was a lot of things that happened to him, and he was still able to forgive and not feel hurt. And to finish our presentation, we saw the 5 steps to self-forgiveness, and in the next slide we will start to talk a little bit about also the 5 steps to forgive, to manage to forgive, remembering that we know and we are aware that practicing forgiveness is not something so easy, but we have to start from somewhere. And I found it very interesting because on those 5 steps, again, the first one is humility, the second one is tears, third one is meekness, fourth, justice, and fifth, mercy. And we will see a little bit about them. And the first one, humility, if we move to the next slide, it's interesting to see that Alberto Almeida tells us that humility enables us to acknowledge who we are, no more, no less, not presuming that we are worth more than we really are, nor deeming ourselves to be useless individuals. So when let's say that we have 2 options, usually, to choose 2 ways to act. When we act with pride, we see an unreal image of ourselves. We pretend to be something we're not. We have deformed values. We are insecure. We have false merits because we think that nothing can happen to us for some reason. We have pseudo virtues. We pretend to be kind. We pretend to be honest. We pretend to be responsible. We have a very low self-esteem, and we present us as perfect beings, as someone who never make any mistake. And we think we are ready and finished individuals. We know we're not. But on the other hand, when we make use of humility, we get in real contact with ourselves. We break away from this distorted self-image. We understand that we are beings, mortal beings, undergoing continuous improvement, and we are evolving spirits. It's still under construction. So accepting all of that, I think we'll take one step closer to others, and we won't feel so armed, and we'll start working towards reconciliation and forgiveness. The second step, also important, is tears. And I found very interesting tears because first time I read and the next slide, I couldn't understand. And tears means opening up to emotions. If we don't want to practice forgiveness in this futile and very trivial and false way, we will need to get in contact with our emotions. We will need to look where it hurts. We may need to cry. Some people need to cry, some people don't. Some people like writing, some people like singing, but we need to be in contact with our feelings. We need to check how we are feeling. This is also one step for the self-healing. The third is meekness. It's being calm. It doesn't mean passivity, but it means having self-control. It gives us time to reflect and to choose an appropriate course of action. And the fourth step is justice, which we can see in the next slide. We relate to this item because we know we have to make amends. We have God's laws written in our conscience, and this step it speaks about us for the need of letting go of the pain, accepting others the way they are, ourselves the way we are, and then we try to make amends for what has happened. It says, Alberto Almeida says that if someone wrongs us, we feel the need to restore our broken inner harmony as an imperative for consciential justice. Similarly, our conscience requires us to set matters right when we hurt others. And finally, at the last slide, is the fifth step, mercy, which we could say melting our heart. It is important because it's the way that we are open for reconciliation. We have worked within, we went through all the steps. So now we have mercy because we know we also need it. We also make mistakes. We are fragile. So is everyone around us. So we need to be a bit more disarmed against each other's. Forgiveness is certainly something not easily achieved. I know we are aware of that, but it's certainly worth every effort we can make towards it, because it will set us free. It is a tool and very useful that we can use to reach our inner harmony. I hope you found it interesting. This is what I had to share. And I'll hand it back to you now, Evanisi, for the final comments. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Cintia, for facilitating our reflections about such a profound theme in our learning process for all of us. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for those who are with us, also joining us in this process. And as we're coming to the end today, then, if you have anything more that you would like to add, Cintia, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, we will finish it with our prayer to finalize it, and would kindly ask you for you to do that. Okay, so we pass it up to you.
Thanks, Evanisi. So we'll finish with our prayer. And we ask those who want to, you can close your eyes and pray the way you feel comfortable to. And we thank the spiritual benefactors for this opportunity to be here, reflecting about such an important subject. We are grateful for all the help we receive. We are grateful for all the relationships we have. We are grateful for this reincarnation. And we ask, may God bless us all and help us to understand more about ourselves and others. So be it.
Thank you very much, Cintia. And as always, as we carry on, coming to the end of this talk today, of these reflections, we also invite every one of those who want to carry on with us through the program Spiritual Christmas, with the main theme, Jesus' Loving Invitation, having with us tomorrow at 6 p.m. London time, our colleague from London, Carolina von Schachten, who will be talking about the theme In the Presence of God, 6 p.m. London time in English. Otherwise, we also invite, I'm so sorry, I need to go in this one. Here is Carolina von Schachten with the team In the Presence of God, as we mentioned, 6 p.m. tomorrow, London time. Otherwise, for all of those who would like to carry on with us tonight at 8 p.m., where we have our talk in Portuguese, 8 p.m. London time, with our friend from Brazil, Fabiano Trumano Chaves, who will be talking about the theme in Portuguese, Perdoar é Amar. So in that way, we leave you here, wishing you very much peace to all, and hope to see you soon in our future events regarding this general program that we have up to the end of December. Wishing you well, Cintia. Thank you very much indeed. Much peace to all of you, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Take care.